Welcome to Whitetail Rendezvous Podcast. This is Bruce Hutchin, host and executive producer. Each week you will hear tips, techniques, strategies, and personal stories from some of the best and funniest whitetail hunters in North America. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you do, tell a friend on social media. If not, tell me and I'll make it better. Thanks for listening, folks. This is Whitetail Rendezvous Podcast 389. On today's episode, we're heading out to Kansas, Kansas, home of Heads Up Decoy. We're going to meet up with Garrett Roe. Garrett's been on the show before, and he talked about lockdown period and his decoys and what his strategies are. This show, we're going to talk about how those strategies come into being when it's shed hunting time. Yeah, there's a lot of secrets he's going to share, but he's looking for ambush sites. He's looking for sites that he can get in on lockdown bucks 6 or 8 months away. It's going to be an interesting show. It's going to be detailed. It's going to be specific. And you're going to come away from this show knowing more about hunting lockdown bucks than ever before. And I'm heading out to Hays, Kansas, and I'm going to meet up with a friend. We're going to talk with a friend, Garret Roe, and Garrett, he's passionate. He's flat out crazy. And if you listen to his earlier show about using a decoy for lockdown whitetails, it was pretty good, and I'm excited to have him on the show today because he is the founder and owner of Heads Up Decoys. So, Garret Roe, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks for having me again. Excited.
Well, I am too for a lot of reasons because I just put in for a whole bunch of tags early in April 4th. They were all due, so I threw them right in. And if I pull some tags, well, I'm going to be getting some product from you and putting it to the acid test here in Colorado. Great. So I'm looking forward to that. I mean, pronghorn and elk and whitetails and mule deer, blah blah blah, all that. But having said that, in the warm-up, we talked about, shed hunting. And, folks, we're going to talk about shed hunting, but really we're going to talk about shed hunting and more. And what the heck does that mean? Well, Garrett's going to take us to, his blog. He wrote in March 16th of 2017, Shed Hunting and Scouting for Whitetail Bucks. So take it away, my friend.
Thanks. I think everybody enjoys, shed hunting. Obviously, most people do the bow hunt. Even if you don't bow hunt, shed hunting has become so popular and competitive. And I probably use shed hunting more as a scouting tool than anything, and to get out of the house. I mean, it's just another excuse, to get outside. Maybe drag your son or daughters, with you, or your whole family, and just get outside on a nice March day or late February or something like that. And that's really what shed hunting for me is. Not necessarily about the, stacking up a pile of bones. I basically look for the obvious. We run trail cameras. We kind of have an idea of what's lived or what was around the area during the season, and then we want to see if we can find some of their antlers, just like everybody. But I don't have exclusive rights to hunt any piece of property that I bow hunt on, and so usually shed hunting is I get lucky if I find one, but I'm generally out looking for the obvious, big antler, and then scouting mostly in the process. And generally people, when whitetail hunting, there's certain areas people just do not want to go into. And then it's another opportunity to kind of go in to a place that you, during the season, you may have wanted to kind of keep as like a sanctuary, not blow anything out. And that's kind of how that's how I, approach shed hunting as more of a scouting mission than probably more than actually finding sheds. And that's kind of how I outlined my blog, really. So
what, so we know the parcel of land we're gonna you've got a couple places you can hunt. So when you hit the woods or the creek bottom or whatever, what are you looking for?
Hidey holes, pockets. They can be the size of your living room. Little crevices, banks, washouts, things like that are really that could hide a buck and a doe, or a buck in general. And then if you find these little spots, and I always go back into my, I try to go back into my memory the best that I can to kind of see, kind of remember where I saw some deer hovering around. And then once I find a little spot that I think, and it has sign in it, obvious sign, there's, old deer beds, rubs, droppings, then I kind of get an idea. It's like, okay, where can I see this from? I mean, can I see this spot from a distance, and what kind of angle I need to use to see it, or how can I get in and out of here, and possibly, if I don't see a deer in that spot, how can I come in, maybe set up with the decoy, the buck decoy, and do like a rattling or calling sequence, kind of like what you and I talked about in the first podcast. How you can come in dry. Maybe if you don't necessarily know that there's a deer in there, there could be, and if you can get into a spot without blowing it out or anything else, you sneak in and out, you set up, you do a call, nothing comes in, nothing reacts, then you can get out quick, and you didn't really do any harm to your spot. You didn't blow anything out, and that's really kind of what I look for. I look for little nooks and crannies of places and pockets where I think a buck is going to push a doe, and then I kind of assess it of how I can see it from a distance, and then how I can get in and out of there and set up. If there's one in there, it's more of a midday type of thing, and so a lot of these places are kind of off the beaten path. But there are times when I'm like smack dab in the middle of a piece of property that I generally just don't walk right into, during the season. I like to skirt places to, play the wind, and just like most whitetail hunters do.
You mentioned a thing, and I'm going to come back around to it. Now, you're hunting during the rut because
Yes.
you're not hunting to catch a deer coming from the food, from bedding to water, bedding to food, transition zones, and all the things and pinch points and funnels. You're actually looking for bucks that this is going to be a travel corridor, or this is where he's going to lock down a doe. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's kind of how that's kind of how I mean, I think everybody kind of does hunts, those travel corridors, and looks for them, just kind of like you had outlined. But you're not always going to be in the right spot, and so let's say you dedicated 4 or 5 hours in the morning from sun up until 10 or 11 in a spot, and you didn't see anything. Well, I didn't see anything here, but I know over here where I couldn't see, there's this pocket that I scouted last March, and I'm going to go over there and maybe glass it, see if I can see anything in it, or maybe set up and try to rattle and call something in, because they're not obviously where I'm at. So that's kind of one of the things. It gives you more opportunity. I mean, obviously, if you're hunting all day long, you've got an opportunity to to have some luck, and that's really how I kind of assess this. Some of these places that I like to hunt or like to go into, these, just like I said, small pockets of property, or little, small, very small areas that might have a buck that, I didn't see in the morning during using kind of like a traditional setup, I guess.
So we're talking from 10 to 2, possibly.
Yeah.
And we're talking long distance scouting, and folks, look up Garret Roe earlier. It was what I forget the numbers, between 281 and 300. Just put Garret Roe in Google Whitetail Rendezvous, and you'll find it. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on long distance scouting, but the thing is, you're hunting off the ground, correct?
Correct. I do 99.9% of my hunting off the ground, and one of the things that I can kind of go back to a traditional type of a whitetail hunt, or how I used this really to almost perfection, was in 2011, where I was shed hunting. I was really scouring a place, and I stumbled onto a ridge that was just choked with yuccas, and it's outlined in that blog. And it was about a half a mile, not quite a half a mile off of a main river bottom, and it faced the southeast. And I was like, you know what, this is and it was dense. And I told myself, I'm going to find a buck in here. I know it. I'm going to find a deer in here. It's not, it's, there was a quarter mile away, there was a small finger of trees, and then another half mile was or not quite a half mile, was the main river. So there's going to be a buck in this yucca patch, because the crop rotation also allowed that was right adjacent to it was going to be wheat for the next year. So food source, travel corridors, and then off the beaten path was this ridge that was choked with yuccas, a dense cover. And when they lay down, they disappear. And sure enough, that November, everything played out just like I had thought it would back in March. I had seen some deer using, this ridge the day before. And so I snuck in the morning, and sure enough, this buck had already locked down a doe at first light, and I blew it. I missed him at 35 yards coming in to the decoys, kind of, skirting and getting into my wind. So I had to take the shot, and I just misranged him. So I'd kind of already played it all out. And that's really what the shed hunting and locating these little spots kind of really came to fruition. It's like, okay, this is what I need to start doing, finding these little spots and pockets that are probably going to have deer in it for the future. And that's really essentially kind of how this whole story came about. And just kind of forecasting and plotting. I mean, I think that's what normal people do when they're scouting for animals. Is they're looking for potential ambush spots, and that's kind of how I came out with this little blog post.
Yeah, and folks, Derek, why don't you tell them where they can find all this information? Because this guy's got it down, folks, and I've got over 130,000 downloads, so I can kind of know kind of when somebody's got something locked in. And so, Derek, tell people how they can read the blog, and then how they can click over and see the picture of where that, was he a booner buck or 150, or what class was he, do you think?
Well, you know what? When I first saw him, I thought he was 170. I saw one antler, and it looked to be 13 inches long. That's all I needed to see. And that's really kind of at that point, I knew he was big. And you don't ever really know until they're on the ground, but he was very large. After I missed him, and he stood there about 95 yards away, looking at me, wondering what just buzzed his armpit, I was like, I just missed the biggest buck I've ever shot at. And that's kind of the story. There's two stories here, and they're both outlined in the blog. And if you go to headsupdecoy.com and you scroll down at the bottom of the page, there's a link that goes to our blog. And the blog that I have about shed hunting and scouting is from March, and then I have a link that takes you back several years ago to my hunt that I had in that yucca patch. And really, I think the frustrating thing for me as a hunter is always seeing deer where I'm not. And that's why I've decided to come up with this product that allows me to take the hunt to them, and has allowed me to be very successful, hunting them either locked down in these little pockets, or somehow catching them when they're cruising from, like a food patch or a travel channel looking for a doe.
So, folks, I'm looking to the yucca plant, and if you don't know what yucca plants are, they're just, what are they, 1.5, 2 feet high at most?
They can be pretty big. They can get, like a cluster of them can get 3 foot high, pretty easy. Okay, and they're really prickly, but it could be CRP too. But it just happens to be that we have yuccas out here where I live. Basically, half of Kansas, I'd say, has there's yuccas in, but it could be a cedar. It could be whatever. It could be a lot of different things. But in my case, these yucca pastures are really good because that's where they go after pheasant season. So once pheasant opener hits, and all these awesome CRP draws have been walked over 15 times, people don't pheasant hunt these yucca pastures where the cattle are, and that's where these bucks go during November after opening day of of pheasant season, and that's where you find them in there. And when it's just, it's really interesting because once they lay down, they're hard to find. But if you know where these patches are that face the sun so they can stay warm and they're off the beaten path, then those are ideal places. It does take a little work to hunt them. There's more than just that. There are so many washouts and plum thickets and those types of things that are really ideal locations for a buck that's shy. I mean, they're smart. They know that these travel corridors, these river bottoms, they're going to be in there, but they also know that there's danger there from people.
Yeah, when I look at it, there's a little terrain break, just a little bit. It kind of looks like a hill down, so that helps. Now, how close was the doe to the buck?
Generally speaking, when these does, so these are like in this particular hunt. What I did was I just crawled in on him, and the doe, she stood up and she wasn't alarmed. And the next thing I know, I kind of lost sight of her, and she was off to my right about 25 yards. And I was waiting for horns. I couldn't find him. I was waiting for horns to be right in my face. But then he had kind of skirted around the ridge and was trying to get into my wind because I didn't have perfect wind. My setup wasn't ideal. And so, he was kind of angling off, trying to get into my wind before he came up. But so they can be on top of you. I mean, those does can be like, right. Those bucks, they don't leave their does. They don't stray from them unless a dominant buck or is coming to harass them. Then they'll kind of escort you off is basically what they like to do.
And folks, if you haven't listened to the other podcast, we're gonna segue back to that because what Garrett has done, he created Heads Up Decoy. You can go to his website, headsupdecoy.com, and then check all his decoys out. But what he's figured out, especially during the lockdown period, where the bucks go. I can't find the bucks. I don't care if you're in Manitoba or you're in Florida. When the doe comes in Estes, the dominant buck in the area is going to find that doe, and he's going to stay with her. And if you come in with the Heads Up Decoy, tell us the rest of the story, Garrett.
So basically, they're going to push that doe away from competition. And where's most of the competition? Is most of the competition's on these, like travel corridors, the river bottom, stuff like that, and so they'll push them and isolate them away, and that's where I find them, and that's where they're most vulnerable. I'm telling you, I've been to a lot of places. I lived in eastern Kansas, and I've driven all over the entire state of Kansas, and I know Kansas is a part of the Midwest, but I'm sure Ohio and Illinois, and Nebraska and Missouri, Iowa, all those places that you think of whitetail hunting have all these places that I'm describing. It may not be yuccas, but that buck will push it into a small place that is isolated where they can see, where they feel safe from and inconspicuous. And that's when you sneak in and you challenge them with this buck decoy. And a whitetail buck, a mature whitetail buck, even a scrub, they don't really during the rut. They all think they're badass, But a dominant buck will feel threatened, and he will. His biggest problem is that he's going to protect his prize at all costs. And when he raises up, he sees those antlers on the decoy, on the buck decoy. He can't help himself. He's gonna escort that buck out of here. And that's when he leaves the doe. Now, if you've got one hot doe and 3 or 4 bucks hovering around, he's not going to leave her. Then that's when you have to move in. But if you can get 50, 60 yards away, which isn't that hard to do, and a buck is in there, and you've presented the decoy either and called at him using a grunt call or a snort wheeze or whatever, he's going to feel threatened, and he's not going to tolerate that. And that's basically when he comes in and he'll escort you. And I swear to God, they're not looking at you. They see the threat, and they posture in. I don't know what they do with their eyes. They come in and you shoot them at point blank range.
And folks, this is real stuff, and I know Garrett well enough, and I know his story, and we spent a lot of time talking to each other. But in Bruce's words, and I'll try to make it quick. So the buck doesn't want you around. You're a so-called challenger because he's got the doe. He wants to do what naturally he wants to do, pass on the gene pool, and so he will stay there until you're right on top of him, and then he's going to come out and kick your butt. Is that kind of sort of
Yeah,
how it is?
you want to try to get into that inside of 80, 60 yards seems to be the magical distance. The farther they can see, maybe the farther you have to get away. But I generally try not to get too close, but close enough to be threatening. Sometimes if you surprise them at 20 yards, they're going to blow out of there. Because they're going to think, I should have seen that. I should have heard and seen this guy before he was 20 yards. So my magical spot is 60, but if it's 100, it's 100. If it's 40, it's 40. It just kind of depends. But that is ultimately the case. I mean, if you've observed whitetail bucks in your tree stand, I know you've seen them things. I know you've seen whitetail bucks escort other bucks away, and that's exactly what's going to happen to you, except you're going to have an arrow. And that's when it's just probably the most thrilling. It's totally unique, to our product as well, in my opinion, is to do that, is to hunt like that. It gives you that option. If you still want to do the traditional thing with a tree stand, then in the midday, this will break up the monotony for you. And I usually like to find the deer, but hey, sometimes you don't spot anything and you want to try to, give yourself an opportunity. You go back, hey man, I remember this spot when I was shed hunting. I got the wind to get into there today. I'm going to sneak in. I'm going to clamp the decoy to this one shrub, and I'm going to lay down some calling and some rattling and see if I can drum up a buck.
And that's pretty how much that's where it goes. So
it is.
Let's take it back. Yeah, there's nothing else to it. I mean, and anybody can go to his site and figure it out. But it sounds simple, but the biggest thing, and we're going to talk about this at length right now, is the scouting. And he said he was shed hunting and more, but it's the scouting, and then what he does during the season, that he's already got his hit list of places, not the deer.
Yes.
Because you don't put out trail cameras,
I do some, but, I think there's, I look for, obviously, it's fun to have a catalog of bucks that you're interested in shooting. And after you want to find them, if you're not seeing them, they could be in one of those little spots that I've identified in March. So, yeah.
So, and you hunt here, or this technique is during midday.
A lot of times, yeah. The buck that I shot this year, I shot at 3 p.m. You know how warm it was this November, and I think it was 85 degrees the day that I shot him at 3 p.m. Yeah, we spotted him at 1. Figured out how to get on. It waited for him to get to bed down with his doe. It made sure that another buck didn't push him off. As soon as he laid down, we gave him a couple minutes, and then I snuck in on him and killed him. From the time he laid down, I had shot him 15 minutes later.
Okay, so take us through this. So you spotted him, right? That's the first thing you did. Just spotted him.
So we were looking. So going back to the earlier conversation, I found a spot many years ago on a shed hunting expedition, and I had figured out how I could see that spot from a distance with my binoculars. It's a half a mile. En route to that, I pulled over, and between me and that yucca patch was the buck and the doe. So they weren't in that. They were in the, we had a lot of moisture, so the grass was really tall. And so he was there. So that's basically how he did it. And he wasn't quite in that. He wasn't in the yucca patch, but he was near it. And then, so we just let him sit because he would have seen me approach. So once he laid down with that doe, he isolated her there because it was much denser cover. So then once he laid down, we had marked him, and then I went in because I'd gotten the wind in my favor, and that's when I crawled in on him and got to 35 or 40 yards, and then called him up out of his bed, challenged him, and shot him at 15 closing.
Okay, so you challenged them.
Mm-hmm.
One, you get the wind in your face, you get the decoy in front of you. Now, was the decoy on
it
your
was
bow?
This time because it wasn't very windy, so I had it on my bow. Yeah, and
okay, so we're out of the truck, we get all geared up, and now we're going to close the deal. So, okay, just walk me through it so the listeners can understand, what you did.
So I'll take you from from sunup. Sunup, we went into an area and tried to intercept some bucks or watch the feed field, basically, a cornfield, and we were going to wait for a buck to come and settle down with a doe in the adjacent CRP. Well, nothing happened that morning. We didn't see the buck we wanted to see, so we had lunch, checked a couple other spots. Sorry, let's stop before lunch. We drew blanks at one spot. I went back to another place that I had previously identified, as a place that could have a buck and a doe in it. We crawled in because the wind was using the wind that I knew that we could use to get in and out of there without being too intrusive. Called, rattled, nothing came out. We backed out, got back in the truck, had lunch, told my buddy, I said, there's a slope over here. I know it's 80 some degrees, but this slope has usually got a buck on it and a doe. I know where we can look at it from. So we got in the truck, parked the truck, put our glass up, and en route, basically we saw them, right? We saw the buck and doe bedded right there. And at that point, it was just a matter of making sure another satellite buck or a smaller buck did not come out and bust him out of there. And it was just a waiting game, waiting for him to lay down with her. And, about 45 minutes, he just stood like a statue. It seemed like that long. It was a long time. And he was oblivious to us because we first spotted him right on the road before we really hid the truck to see if he was something we needed to really have a closer look at. And that's basically what it was. We were going to these spots that I had previously outlined from scouting while I was shed hunting to find a buck and a doe pair. And that's basically what happened, Bruce. He was in thicker cover than what the yuccas was and hidden away from off the beaten path, and laid down with this doe. I let him settle in a little bit. We marked him, and I went in, and everything looks different when you're at eye level. And right in that area, everything kind of changes from maybe a glassing spot, as because that's how you elk hunt. Everything looks different from really close. You think you have everything marked really good, but I crawled in and had the wind in my favor, and I literally had to snort, wheeze, and grunt and do all kinds of crazy stuff before he finally stood up. Once he stood up, his doe kind of took off a little bit, and then I thought it was over, but it really, he snort wheezed at me, and then he started posturing right in to escort me out of the area. And little did he know I was there to shoot him.
And you didn't miss, man. I would have been sideways and upside down, inside out.
Well,
but you got some.
Yes, it was because he was closing. I shot him at 15 closing, and it was thick cover. And my initial setup, Bruce, was to pick my spot. I had holes and lanes in the weeds, and he wouldn't get up. And so I crawled ahead another 10 yards, essentially giving up all my shooting lanes. And so then when then he finally got up, and he was really close. I could have shot him if the cover was good. I could have shot him from when he stood up, but it was so dense I couldn't. All I could see was his head, and I was basically kind of where there wasn't any cover, so I could move my bow and my decoy and my arrow wouldn't get hung up on a bunch of stuff. So I was kind of out in the open, but he had already seen me and heard me and knew I was a deer. And that's when he postured in. And that was in the middle of the day, kind of like we talked about earlier.
Yeah. And so it is possible, folks. And yeah, we're talking about Kansas, and Kansas is, you think it's flat. It really isn't. And there's plenty of hills and valleys and gullies and just depressions. I call them depressions because I've hunted in some places there couldn't be a buck any place around, and we're pheasant hunting, and and there's no way to be a whitetail in that stubble field. And guess what? There's just a little depression, and he's in there. Nobody's screwing with him. He's all alone, and all of a sudden the dog busts him, or he gets up, and you go, "Holy fright!" And we're not talking about 1.5, 2.5 year old deer.
Yeah, you are so correct. How little cover it takes to protect these deer from wind and give them cover and essentially make them just disappear. It's amazing how they can the world can swallow them up. And these little spots are everywhere. They're an 80-acre piece of ground in southeast Kansas can have 7 or 8 of these little spots, or more. And so that's when I shed hunt, I look for these little spots, these little pockets, because they don't need to be big. They could be as big as your bedroom, and that's more than they need to be hidden and off the kind of where they feel safe and comfortable, where they can isolate that doe and not have to worry about competition.
So a couple of takes away right now. One, and this goes back to the beginning of the show. So we're shed hunting, but we're really not. Garrett is looking for these little honey holes. And do you have a journal, or how do you remember all these places?
I take a fresh look at every place I hunt every year. I kind of wipe it clean, and I say, okay, I have an idea, but I try to take a fresh look at every spot every year because I might have a new idea. Like when I tree stand hunted, a lot of times I would take my tree stands down because it would force me to look at this spot a little differently to fine tune 15, 20 yards in a tree stand is huge. And so I try to take a fresh look every year when I'm scouting because, I don't food plot. So crop rotation is a huge thing. When are they going to go to wheat? Because there's always that time, late October, early November, they switch off of Milo and bam, all of a sudden they're all on wheat. So everything kind of, the doe movement can change really, basically in a couple of days. And so you've got corn here, but it's not going to be corn this year. It may be nothing. Then over here, the next year you've got winter wheat, or you've got a Milo field, and then certain times during the year, Milo is a magnet. And so I try to take a fresh look every year, think about crop rotation, and when I'm shed hunting, and kind of project what this field is going to have in it the next year, and then what areas I've maybe thought about or seen in previous years that are going to be back on to being on fire again. Because there's some areas, sometimes they can be, some areas can really be hot, and then the next year it's graveyard because the crop rotation is different. So I try to take a fresh start every year, and then I catalog as much as I can.
In a book, or on a laptop, or on a spreadsheet?
In my head, basically. Yeah. Oh. So, just try to keep it, because some of the areas I hunt aren't that big.
Well, how big are they?
I got one spot that I really is my favorite. It's an 80-acre CRP field with a little bit of tree in it. So there's a couple of trees and some 1 or 2 little locust thickets in it.
And what's around it?
Miles and miles and miles of cropland. So it's just like an island in the middle of huge cropland area. So.
And where's the water?
Sometimes there, sometimes in a windmill. There's a few farm ponds there, but as soon as those freeze up, then they're moving. But I like to hunt there prior to pheasant season opening up, and occasionally I'll catch one. Occasionally I'll catch one in there, after opening day. But then it's straight to pastures, the river bottom and pastures with yucca is where people don't pheasant hunt. That's where the deer. Then you get back into these little washes, these little thickets, these yucca patches off, the main river bottom, where these bucks will isolate does, chase them up and out into, and then pin them down, basically.
So, folks, you've never been along creek bottom, river bottom in Kansas. There's cottonwoods and there's thickets, and there's everything whitetails need. But then the thing that I've learned is that all of a sudden you look for a finger that goes out, and it's sort of kind of like actually hunting elk. When you go into drainage, you go in the basin. There's just a natural path where they're going to leave that and head out into open country. I mean, sometimes you get above tree line and there's just a finger of spruce, and all of a sudden you'll see it, and then if you watch it long enough, they just stay right in that finger until they got to go out to feed, and they all stream out of that one finger. Well, that's what I'm talking about here. It could be a washout or whatever, but the bucks will come out of the bottom because they know where they're going. They don't want anything to do with you or me or any other buck because they're in competition.
Correct.
So, does that make sense? Does that help me out with this?
It does. And so movement during the rut is random as well. It's not hunting bucks during the rut. It's random. I mean, you could blow an opportunity, and 30 minutes later, you'd have another one. But their movement's a little bit random, more random, as far as like, here's their bedding area, here's their staging area, here's where they're going to feed, and they're going to be moving somewhere between that. Well, a buck, he's going to be checking those areas, and if he draws blanks, he's going to go to another spot because, he knows where the does are. Just like we know where, if we've done our good scouting in March, we know where these little hidey holes are that they may be, isolating a doe with. And so he's going to go to the next spot. He doesn't care how he gets there necessarily. He's just going to get there. And then he may make, so there's a lot of random movement with bucks. It's all based on whether or not there's a hot doe or does in heat in that area. And then he'll stay around for a while. And that's kind of why you get some areas that are cold and some areas that are hot with buck activity. And so when I'm looking for sheds, I keep going back to this. When I look for sheds, I look for little pockets somewhere around a food plot or a natural travel corridor like a river bottom that a buck is going to push a doe in. And the reason is I spent my whole life seeing that. I've never acted on it until the last 7-8 years. I've just been mercilessly and agonizing. It's been an agonizing experience watching these deer that I've never really been able to, that have been quote unquote untouchable, in these little pockets away from my tree stand, and I'm just watching them, helplessly. And now I've said, I'm not hunting out of my tree stand. I'm going to let them do their thing. And when they're out in these, and they've got this buck, and there's this buck, and he's got this doe, and he's pushing her, and he's got his spot, and they bed down. That's when I go in. And I, like I said, a lot of times I identify these places, during shed season. I because I'm on foot, I can see, okay, they're using this spot. They're here. And like I said, with that yucca patch, I know there's almost always a buck and a doe bedded there. At some point during a November season, there'll be a buck and a doe in this yucca patch. I just need it to be the day that I'm there.
And I like what you said, tree stand, I hate to say traditional, but let's just stay with traditional, get above them and let them come to you and so forth and so on, intercept them or like I do, spend all day in the stand and hope Mr. Wonderful runs by or trots by or walks by, and you do your calling sequence. So that's a great segue that it came up. Talk to me about your calling sequence when you're coming up on a buck. You've already got him, you know where he is. He's got a doe pinned down. You know what the game is now. So how are we going to call him?
So generally what I do, so we have a buck that's isolated a doe. We know where he's at. I usually try to get to 60 yards, and then I settle in, and I make sure, one, I have shooting lanes, and that I'm as close to being directly downwind of him as possible. And the next thing I do is then I just start with a simple grunt. I have a very loud grunt call that I use. I like it because it's loud. They can hear it. I don't like these soft ones because I want to hear them I want to reach out and tap them on the shoulder, basically, and get their attention. And I start with a simple grunt. And if I don't...
What does that sound like? Can you like, voice call?
Yes.
Like
just... Yeah, exactly. And if I don't get a reaction from them, then I give them a snort wheeze. I go... And I just do that with my mouth. As loud as I can. I want to sound as mean and bad as I can. And then if I don't get him to come up, then I kind of crawl up on him a little bit. Then I'll change position. I'll crawl up. I try not to crawl and walk up on them because that's usually when they're hard to get that way. I like them to come to me, and usually that's just enough to get him there. I mean, that's usually what it takes, because like I said, they hear that and they cannot help themselves. They can't resist protecting their prize. They can't help themselves. They're not going to tolerate you. And that's when they posture in and you shoot them, inside of 20 yards.
Okay, so if I'm downwind, is he going to circle left or right and go crosswind to try to pick up my scent, or he doesn't really care because he sees the horns, he sees the decoy, and he's just going to come in?
I can't figure that one out yet. I think if there's angle to your wind, they're going to go that way. If you're directly downwind, I've tried to think, do they come towards the head side, or how do they? And I don't know if I can tell you that either. They just come up with a path. Usually they try to angle towards the head side of the decoy. But that's not necessarily true, because the buck that I shot this year didn't do that. He came in, he was just coming in. He may have, if I'd have let him come a little closer, he may have turned and gone the other way to show his whole body. And they want to look as big as they can. Yeah. And it's just an interesting concept. It's a very effective concept, but it does take some strategy. You've got to really know, where these bucks are kind of where they're at. If you can't see them from a long ways away, then you really got to do your homework and march to figure out where these little spots might be, so you can go in there and you're basically cold calling.
I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. I don't know if
I like that.
And as you and I have talked, and you reached out to me for this podcast, I thought all day, even the last weekend, I was like, I really need to do a better job of kind of cataloging how I'm coming up with some of the theories that I have. Because I just spend most of my time trying to figure out how to get through the day, get through the deer season, where I can, like, I see one and I just go and try to, I don't really worry about the philosophy about it. I just see one and I just go in and kill it, is essentially what I'm trying to do. But I need to be more analytical so I can help people, and educate people so they can do this better. But I think most people kind of get it. Most people understand that there's this time when these does and this buck is going to be with a doe, and he isn't going to move, and they're not going to move. But identifying those areas, those pockets, that's, you do it, I think, when you're shed hunting. That's when you find them. Because they could be very small. Like I said, it could be an area the size of your bedroom that could have a buck in there at least once or twice a year, or a doe in there at least once or twice a year.
So, to make the odds in cold calling, it's just it's a lot of work.
It can be, yes.
But when you know what the prospects are. Let's take it to everybody who's selling or sold something. So, okay, we got a product. Our product is, I'm going to go kill that deer.
Yeah.
I don't know how else to say it. That's the product. That's the outcome, and the product is the buck. So I'm going to go. So now I want to find out. Okay, where are my prospects? Now the prospects aren't the deer. The prospects are the spots.
Yes.
So now I have to cover as many spots as I can. Long distance glassing, which you talked about before. Go listen to that podcast. But now we're long distance scouting, or we're cruising and saying, okay, within 5 miles of me, I got 3 spots. Okay, I'm going to put the wind in my favor, and I'm going to go check them out, and I'm going to go and I'm going to grunt, then I'm going to snort ways. Am I going to rattle or not?
I would rattle. Do it all. Yeah, because it's all natural.
Okay.
You're not.
So, because I'm prospecting, so I'm just banging up. So I'm banging horns, snort wheezing, and grunting, and I'm not doing a tending grunt. I'm looking. Hey, I'm bad. I'm going to kick your butt, and if you're here, you better come and see me. Type thing. That's a sales presentation. So now, if he's there, good, game on. If he's not, then I have to go to X. I just work through my prospects for that afternoon, and I either hit a honey hole or I don't.
That is correct.
Is that kind of much?
That's exactly right. I have a friend of mine that does that with to perfection, absolutely to perfection. It's not unusual for him to rattle 2 or 3 bucks in. a week doing just like that. Just it's he does it with supreme efficiency. And I actually have a couple friends that are really good at it. That's what they do. They say, okay, they hunt the morning. I didn't see one. I don't have any options. Then he finds a spot and that he's identified as being a place where there could be a bedded buck and doe, or a bedded buck, whatever. And then he sets up on them downwind, grunts, rattles, snore, wheezes, whatever, and sees if he can get one to come up out of there to challenge him, and he shoots him. If you draw blanks, you go to the next spot. You just keep doing it, and then when deer movement is, when you get to the point of the day when the deer are up on their feet, more regularly, evening, then you kind of change tactics. You go back to finding them on their feet and either trying to intercept them like that, or and then it gets dark. Basically, that's essentially what your routine. Get in the morning, try to find one that's on his feet, or intercept one that's on his feet. Got nothing. Find these spots that you've identified long ago and set up on them. Hunt. Set up, move in, set up, call, rattle, nothing, and then you repeat the afternoon, trying to intercept one on its feet, and then the next morning you get up, you spot one, you either intercept him on his feet or he is way out there. He's ahead of you. Okay, I'm going to watch him. He's just bedded down with his doe. Now I'm going to move in and I'm going to kill him. That's my day. That's my November right there in a nutshell.
Yeah, I'm just thinking a lot of ways we can go. Listeners, this isn't, Whitetail Hunting 101, and this is intense. It's extensive, and I'm going to figure a way to even elongate this on a different podcast, because we've been on for about an hour, but we got a lot of work to do, and we'll talk about that in the post show. But
hopefully,
at this point,
hopefully this was it's hard for me to really truly describe kind of the method in a real scientific bullet pointed area. I just find some spots that I think there's going to be deer activity in it later in the year, and I try to find those places in March when I'm shed hunting, and then that's when I go in, and that's where a lot of times I have a lot of my action is in those spots.
Yeah, and if you're selling, you go to places you close the deal before. I mean, it's not hard. 80% of my sales comes from 20% of my prospects. I mean, that's the Pareto rule, 80-20 rule by Pareto, an Italian guy that a long time ago figured it out. And hey, 80-20 works in any aspect.
Yeah.
There's no questions about that. Wow. All right. So tell people how to get hold of you. Tell people where your website are. Tell them where the blog is again, and then give some shout outs. And we're going to wrap this episode of Whitetail Roundabout.
Bruce, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be on here. We covered a lot of stuff. HeadsUpDecoy.com is my website. We have a blog at the bottom of the page link. We try to revitalize that a little bit. We've got some great stories and pictures from people that have used all of our products. And that's kind of sometimes where we discuss a particular hunt, and sometimes some how-to. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, Heads Up Decoy. Just search us, and you'll find that we've done some really interesting things. We've been at this for a long time, Bruce. This is year number 9 that I've had Heads Up Decoy, and we have checked so many things off the list that we've kind of forgotten about how we even started it in the first place, because the product, the techniques have developed over the last, the first 2 or 3 years. We learned a lot about our own product, and now we've just been repeating them for the last, 5 or 6, and educating is the best that we can.
Well, Garret Roe of Heads Up Decoy, thanks so much for being, a return guest, and we got some work to do, and we'll talk more about that. And I just said in the post show, but folks, listen and take notes and think about where you hunt, because I don't care where you hunt during the lockdown. You can use this technique to have some excitement and get in on some bucks that you never would any other way. And I can say that because I know Garret Roe, and he told me so.
It's true.
so, so thank you again. April 11th, 2017 will go down the day I hit 130,406 or more downloads of the show. And I want to thank every single guest. I want to thank my listeners and, my partner, Bob Rourke, for this. And having said that, we're going to wrap the show. Garret Roe, thank you so much for being a guest on Whitetail Rendezvous.
Thanks, Bruce. Appreciate it.
Hey, you're in a treat for the next episode of Whitetail Rendezvous. We're going to connect with John Stallone. John Stallone's going to talk to us about a mature buck that he took in Long Island, New York, and he's called it the Swamp Donkey. Also, we're going to find out how a Long Island kid got out to Arizona and turned his passion into a great business.
Thanks for joining us. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous, where you can listen and learn from the experts so you can be more successful on your next hunt. Until next time, listen, learn, and succeed.